I'm Juanita Shang. I was Juanita Chataway. I was born in Mackay, 20th of the 9th, 1934. My father was Frederick Guy Chataway, my mother Erica, and her maiden name was McCarahan. Her people came out from Ireland on the boat race course, and they landed in Sydney, and then they came up to Tenterfield from there. That's where they were. And her father joined the paper. He did his apprenticeship in the paper when he was 13 years old. And he was in the paper until he died. 63 years he was in the paper industry. My mum was born in Warwick, and her dad then got a job up in Mackay at the Standard, and they came up by steamship. No other way, up by steamship, and they anchored outside Mackay, and they were slung in a sling. They were put over into boats, little boats to bring them into Mackay. And John, Mum's dad, he worked at the Standard, but it got burnt down. And then he got a job in the Daily Mercury, and he stayed there until he retired. He was going to retire, but he didn't. And then he had a heart attack, and that finished his job. So they came out on the race course when John was only just a little lad. And I think the father died on the race course, his father. They took weeks and weeks to get across to come to Tenterfield. My dad was born in Mackay in 1899. He was a Chataway, and his grandfather was a Reverend James Chataway in England, in Rotherhithe. He served a lot of time in Rotherhithe, and he told his sons to go out into the world. That was strange in those days, wasn't it? And 3 came to Australia, 2 to Canada, and 1 went over to Rhodesia. And all the girls I think he had 15 children altogether. So those boys would have left home before the youngest girls were born. The youngest were born. They came to Mackay, and they also were in the paper industry. And I think Vincent was, I think he was mayor, I think he was in the council, and so was Tom. Vincent ended up in Brisbane in the government departments, and Tom ended up in Senate. Well, he had to go to Melbourne in those days to be in the Senate. That's where the Senate was, down in Melbourne. So he went down to Melbourne to the Senate. Dad's father, his father bought him a cane farm at Urbana, and that was fine while they had the Kanakas to work the cane farm. But as soon as the Kanakas weren't allowed to be bought out, Dad's father couldn't manage the farm as an English person. And he went to, they then moved to the experimental station where he lived. And he died when Dad was only 10. So his mother then had to have a boarding house. And poor old Dad had to help in the boarding house. And very often there wasn't enough beds, so he'd have to give up his bed to some new guests that had just arrived, or else he'd be taken out of bed at midnight to go and get the chips for the morning. He hadn't got the wood and the chips for the morning. And he'd have to help his mother in the boarding house until he worked in the Mercury, and then he got an apprenticeship, which his mother paid for, with a dentist, as a dental mechanic. They called him dental mechanics in those days. Didn't call them prosthesists like they do these days. And then Dad joined the army in 1942 and went to Brisbane to the exhibition grounds where he was in charge of the dental corps, teaching the lads how to be dental mechanics and that sort of thing. Poor old Mum was left home with 5 children to look after. The wives had a hard time, didn't they? 5 children to look after. And then in 1942, when the Japanese came down through the Coral Sea, they were all warned to send their wives out west, and that we went out onto a sheep station out near Miles. By the time we got back, my eldest brother had joined up, and then 2 years later, my second brother had joined up. So Mum was left with 1 boy and 2 girls to look after. One very, very hard to look after lad. I think Dad must have decided, send him out to Aunt Lil, she needs help on her cane farm. And he went out there. My dad's, that was my dad's father. My dad's mother, she came from Sydney and she married Duncan Mant. This is where the red coat came in. Duncan Mant, he gave up his commission when he came to Sydney to marry Catherine. But he got married in the red coat. And the red coat, somehow or other it's gone down the family, and somehow or other our family ended up with it. I don't know why. And my sister and I decided that we would give it to the military museum. So that's where the red coat is, over in the military museum. It's so tiny, they've had to put it on a lady's bust. My son Sydney, he tried it on when he was 13 and he could not get it done up. So they were very tiny people in those days, weren't they? They certainly didn't have the feet that our kids have got these days. 6, 14 and 15-year-old size shoes. Little bit. Yes, so that was really my generation, my mother's and father's family. Dad come back from the war. He didn't get a job. He didn't get the job back at the clinic. He got a job working on the roads, building the road to the harbour. It's hard work, wasn't it, digging and then he bought a truck and he went out and he carted cane for the cane farmers, my Aunt Lil and a few others. And then eventually he got a job with a dentist, and then he said, I think I'll start out on my own. And then he started out his own dental business, and he had quite a few dentists that he did the jobs for and charged them that way. He worked for himself. And then, I don't know why, Dad always wanted to buy a cane farm. He always wanted to be a cane farmer. And he bought a cane farm for my brother. But my brother and his wife didn't like it very much, and they more or less didn't want it, so Dad had to go. Dad went up onto the cane farm. I think he must have been in his late 50s, which was very hard on my mum, I think. Because you don't have the first year they cut cane, it flooded, and they had to take the cane out on the tractors and pull it out on a sledge. So it was a bit different in those days. But then he retired. Keith and I, he had a big block of land, and he gave us 1 block of land, and that's where we built our house next door to Mum and Dad. I was the first daughter. I had 3 brothers older than me, and the eldest one was 10 years older. So by the time I started school, he had started working his apprenticeship. So, and then the second one, he got a job in a grocery shop. He used to go around and collect the orders from the ladies, and then the cart would deliver the groceries the next day. He'd ride his bike down through all the sand and everything. The ladies, he'd get to the ladies and they'd say, just sit there a minute because I'm watching my favourite serial. And he'd have to sit and wait, and then they'd give him a drink and something to eat. But anyway, so I was 5 when I started school. I don't think I'd ever been out of my mother's. I'd never been away from my mother, I don't think, when I started school, and I'm sure she didn't take me to school. My youngest brother took me to school. Now we'd get down there to school and I'd say, I'm sick, take me home. And we'd have to turn around and walk all the way back home again. Mum would say, Mum got a big jack of this, and in the end she used to bundle the two of us back to school. But school, kids these days go off when they're 2-year-old and leave their mothers. I've never been away from Mum. No wonder why it was a big wide world out there. But anyway, we had Prep 1, Prep 2, Prep 3, Prep 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we went across to an intermediate school where all the kids in the whole district went to intermediate school, even those that came by rail motor. Some of them caught the rail motors 2 and 3 hours trip in, then they'd go home in the afternoon again. I don't know whether they had farm duties to do, but I don't know when they did their homework. So that was, we did 6 and 7 there, scholarship and intermediate. If you were bright enough and wanted to go on, you went to high school. Otherwise, you got a job. A lot of people got jobs in the government jobs, state government, federal government. But I went to commercial school. It was run by an old lady, an elderly lady, in an old shop that she'd set up with desks and something, and we went there and learned shorthand and typing and commercial stuff. And then I'd been there almost 9 months when she called me and she said, look, they need a girl down at the butter factory. The girl that worked there had been killed on a motorbike accident and they had to replace her. Go down and see the boss. I went down and I think I was there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And I don't know what he said to me. He said, oh yes, you're all right, you can start on Monday. Well, that was pretty easy, wasn't it, to get a job in those days? So then on Monday I started work down at Port Curtis Dairy. And it was funny because the girls didn't like my name. They said it was very hard. And they said, I think maybe you've got a nickname, well, we'll call you Jenny. And for the 13 years I was at the butter factory or Port Curtis Dairy, nobody knew me by any other name but Jen or Jenny. Never knew I don't think they'd even know what my first name was. So I worked there for 13 years until handsome men came along. And in those days you weren't allowed to go back to work. Well, my boss, he knew definitely you couldn't go back to work. So you had to give up work. So Keith and I were married. He used to come down, as he said, he used to come down to check the cream cans. It was every month, and then it was every 3 weeks, and then it was every 2 weeks. He came down with another fella, and I think it was him that said, Kate, she's a good-looking sort. Why don't you ask her out? And my boss said, yeah, you go with him. No, the Chinese have got plenty of money. Plenty of money, Jen, you go with him. He didn't have any money, he had plenty of debt. But anyway, we got married in 63, and then we had 3 lovely children, Joanne and Sydney, and then Christine. We had a terrible time with Joanne, 3 months, and she cried every day and every night, I think. But I think it was really us and not her. Then we had Sydney, and he was a beautiful baby. So we thought we could do it a 3rd time, and we had Christine. We're lucky that we had Christine because she lives here. And, without her, or without the kids, we wouldn't survive, I don't think. And then they have, and then Keith said, well, I'm going to put in for Maryborough. How do you think? And I'd been in Mackay 40 years, hardly been out of the place. What a shift. So anyway, okay, we'll give it a go. We came to Maryborough. I think it was the best move we made, getting out of Mackay and spreading our wings a bit. We came here just as the Methodist Church was closing, and they were joining with the Presbyterian. We came in 76 and 77 was Union, where we all joined together, became Uniting Church. So we met a lot of lovely people, new friends. They didn't know our background, and they took us as they found us, so you weren't carrying any baggage, and my name became Juanita. And it has ever. When I came, I said, right, my name is Juanita, and nobody ever knows me as anything else. So, yes, I taught Sunday school, and then Joanne joined Girls' Brigade, and Sydney joined Boys' Brigade, and Keith became a Boys' Brigade leader and captain. And he had a lovely time with the boys in Boys' Brigade, and I became a Girls' Brigade leader. And in the end, the 5 of us were all in brigade together. We had I think I had 13 years in brigade. It was a lovely experience. Went down to the Dandelions to conference. We went to Brisbane to conference and stayed in a boys' boarding school. And so the leaders down in Brisbane had to make sure they put curtains on all the showers, because they were just all open showers. It was cold. God, it was cold down there in Brisbane in that boarding house. I don't know how those boys survived. Yeah, I did hear you ask Keith what it was like. It was very difficult, I think. I think I found it very difficult. There were a couple of families, Chinese families in Mackay, the Sams. Yeah, the Sams. And they'd married white people. But it was very difficult in those days. It wasn't a done thing. Not like today. I mean, you see lots of people, don't you? White people with dark... And I think Keith's skin was darker in those days. Isn't it funny? I don't even notice him being dark now. No, in those days. And yes, and then he decided he'd take me home. And I got home. It was a real experience. When I got home, there was all these little dark, well, they looked dark anyway, little dark kids sitting on the steps, on the railings of the steps. There seemed to be a multitude of them. They were Keith's nieces and nephews. They were about 12, 13, 10, 9. Yeah, but, so that was an experience. His mother was always very nice to me, yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time with her. She did come down and visit us. And I ironed pillow slips, and I'll always remember, she said, you won't be doing that for very long, ironing pillow slips and tea towels. And I didn't either. It wasn't long after that I gave away ironing pillow slips and tea towels. When we got married, she said to me, now you will look after him, won't you? He'd been away from home for about 20 years, I think. Yeah, so, yeah, she was a dear soul. Unfortunately, his sister Hazel died when she was 47, so I didn't have much time with them. Doris came down for holidays, and she died at 54, so I didn't have much time with her. And his eldest brother, Sid, died at 54. So we didn't get to know. I didn't have a lot of time with his family. His other brother, Percy, died at 69. And Andy, who was never married, he died at 72. So Keith and Ailsa, I don't know why, but they must have been given the better genes, I think. He's 91 nearly, and Ailsa's 89. We are very fortunate. We have 7 beautiful grandchildren. And I would like to just finish by saying I think the world is going to be well looked after by the younger generation who are coming on. I have a lot to be thankful for. When I get up in the morning, I give thanks for the day and everything that I have been given. I've had a good life. I can't complain.